more about Kazakhstan. So there's no better person to give you an introduction to some of these broad themes about identity and culture and the history, archaeology of knowledge construction as Laura's lecture goes. So as I said, Laura she is trained as an Orientologist in the classical sense of the term. I'm not talking about ideological sense, classical sense of Orientology. That's her training. English, you heard we talked to her in English. Russian, Kazakh, Turkish, French also.
A little bit.
And Hindi, sorry, and Hindi. Okay, upper. And Hindi. So a very different set of languages to learn. And she's done research in India, in Pakistan, elsewhere, UK also, and so we are very fortunate to have somebody like her here for us to guide us through this process. So now I hand over to Laura for her lecture on In Search of Identity, Archaeology as Knowledge Construction and Nation Building. And just one other thing, we have all these snacks and tea, so just feel free whenever you want to have something there, and I think the facilities are out just there outside the corridors. Okay,
thank you.
I'm
not sure whether the quality of the presentation, in terms of light, is good or not.
Can you see?
Yeah, but maybe we can switch off here.
Yeah, lights.
So I will thank you, Mr. Bhavna. And as always, pleasure meeting you. And I knew Mr. Bhavna for a long time, distantly. In her publications, especially in Central Asia, and really some cross-cutting interest in terms of identity in the region. And my presentation today will be about their identity. Will be about that part of identity which we say be formed as part of the social cohesion, as a part of the knowledge construction, and through the prism of archaeology. So nation building could be described, this is a brief continuation of my presentation, which will have the knowledge construction and discoveries, including particularly specifically as today we heard the relationship with ancient groups or cultural groups that inhabited the country. So in introduction I will speak about, first of all, about nation building, which will be defined as a process of constructing national identity through the social integration and cultural cohesion. Of course, it requires special significance during the period of transformation, which was the case with Soviet Union in general, but in Kazakhstan in the since 1991 period. So there are various approaches of scholarship that suggest how nation building could be viewed as cultural integration via the common heritage of memories. We see from the response of Ernest now. Actually, he was a French scholar of the 19th century, but his work was republished certainly in the 90s when the issue of identity, in particular of ethnic identity, including religious one, and Smith. So we may find that nation building could be viewed as via the prism of nationalism, as Ernest suggests, modernization, elsewhere, and Russell, or through the points of view, or through the lenses of mythologization and primordial population, which has been given as the given fact of the nation. But these approaches to link knowledge and power within, I guess, this approach of they will talk about this, a little bit about this, or the colonial approaches theories, starting from Said, and I didn't mention all of them, but just for brief reference, Komikapka, Walter Mignola, and Walsh in the second decade of the 21st century, which spoke about the the need to link the so-called Orientalism and coloniality with modernity, and also they highlighted the high role of the knowledge and power. So that was approaches that also could be reflected in the works of French philosophical schools of Michel Foucault and his specific 1972 work of Archaeology of Knowledge, in which he specified and particularly highlighted the very high role of power, of knowledge and discursive practice. Because under colonial subjugation, the discursive practice, as called the diversity of the possible levels of analysis, presumes an approach, I'm citing it, against the uniform model of temporalization, resulting in celebration of plurality. So that is the idea in 1972, looks very much philosophical, general, however, throughout in 2 decades, in the 90s, it became practical reality when the Soviet Union collapsed, and the new identities had been born, or resurfaced, or reformed, or reimagined again. So again, this background, the knowledge construction acquires importance and significance in nation-building process. Because for social cohesion and solidarity, one should look at numerous dimensions of this knowledge construction throughout in the context which could be broadly defined as intellectual history. So the intellectual history as a discipline became more or less organized also relatively recently, since 1960, and thanks to the British scholars who linked the colonial, intellectual history with this political history and political processes as well. However, when we speak about the intellectual history, we could speak about, of course, a series of history of human experience and human reflections on this experience. From this perspective, any part of intellectual history, whether it relates to the ideas of geologies or literary studies, cultural environment, and individual and institutional agencies, and science as well, scientific discoveries, all these constitute a field of intellectual history. So I'm talking about this because of the need to perhaps of my idea to look at the process of which we are experiencing here in Kazakhstan as well as in Central Asia and in the general more post-Soviet space from the prism of different, let's say, different facets of different approaches that could be manifested themselves in the concept of hybridity, or the third space, first articulated by Tony Parker. He was of Indian origin, working in America, and who in the 90s, and particularly his famous book Location of Culture, has been quite profound in the sense that he, using the experience of his motherland, which is South Asia, India particularly, the experience of finding this ambivalency or ambivalent or dual place, how it called this, in between space. This is the speeches when the previous space, that is colonial, has been finished, however it has been prolonged and still deeply rooted in the ideas, mentality, behavior and so on in the new post or decolonial settings. For him, the nation is a factor of a dual or ambivalent narrative. And because of this, we are not free of those different signals or segments or spaces that are becoming crossed in our mentality. So taking these approaches which I have now taken, I'm trying to understand how intellectual tradition is very useful to the study of the history of the nation in hybrid societies, and how all these elements contribute towards knowledge production. So how the knowledge production can create new meaning making, and through meaning making can lead to new symbols through the symbolization process. So these ideas, which is at the basis of my presentation today, and the goal of which is, as you see here, I would like to discuss the interplay between archaeology as a field of scientific knowledge, or we may say as a field of intellectual history, scientific knowledge production, and nation building on the other side as a form of social cohesion in a post-decolonial, or we may say decolonial milieu. How to discuss this interplay within the frame of the concept of hybridity and the knowledge construction. And while speaking about these elements, the focus is about, is on the cultural heritage of the country, of Kazakhstan, and particularly cultural heritage going as far as back to the first millennium before Common Era. So, and today the Dean told us about the Sakha tribes, which are, I will speak about these discoveries, how the heritage of those far distant history of Sakha tribes associated with the ancient history of the region, and how this history and how our knowledge has been appropriated by the state agency in its approach to define some new paradigms which the state feels suitable for its own benefit. So this is just briefly introductory part of my presentation, and the hypothesis is the following. I would like to find out how this hybridity, how under the hybridity the construction of knowledge acquires, which features it acquires, which characters. And I would like to see that this construction of knowledge takes place through the appearance of history, which is based on the discursive approach explained by Foucault, and it contributes towards our cultural identity as a nation, because at the same time, I would like to find out how the high role of the state agency in hybrid society can be manifested through the power, through the ideas, how the power constructs the knowledge, how the power regulates ideology, and how the power symbolizes these new narrations to pursue its own pattern of stability. Today you also heard about the stability, sustainability of the country, and perhaps it's one of the main issues because, as we discussed, we're sandwiched between different cultural areas, between different cultural zones and models of, let's say, models of culture that inevitably influenced us now, and how to survive or to make our existence sustainable as a state. The country, the identity looks back to its history to find out the mechanism of this survival. So, and through this specific topic of the archaeology knowledge production, I would like to show exactly this element. Archaeological field, as you know, it becomes very important in terms of being a so-called reference point, a special zone which is framed in this dual process of interplay between nation building on the one side and knowledge construction. So, from this perspective, I would like to speak today about this knowledge construction of archaeological knowledge production. So, first of all, today Bhavna told us about this Orientalist frame, and there were questions about why we are Oriental Faculty. Actually, this is the legacy of this knowledge production of the past, because we were being, as our history and culture has been defined with this orbit of Orientalism and Oriental knowledge production, and as according to the Bhavna, it is still in us, perhaps not to much extent, depending on with whom you are talking about, on which topic. But this knowledge construction within the Orientalist frame should be also discussed here, because it is very big, say, like for about 200 centuries, for 2 centuries, the knowledge has been constructed step by step with different individuals, actors, and institutions. As far as our region is concerned, Central Asia and Kazakhstan, The first so-called, I'm putting this in the brackets, so-called scientific exploration, perhaps the discoveries of the other have been initiated at the beginning of the 18th century by Peter the Great, that was the Russian Tsar, or later became emperor. He proclaimed himself in 1721. So he found it should be interested, because he was very modernized from at his time. He was studied in Poland, in the seaports, and he was keen to how to introduce the modern technology to the Russian, and being fascinated by the modernization, modernity of that time, he was also keen to search for different historical past legacy of the country, which the Russian Empire has been colonized by that time. So, and by that time, when I mentioned when he was called emperor himself, 1721, that was because the Russia declared himself as an empire. In the research of the southern Siberia and the adjacent territories of what is nowadays Kazakhstan, he sent so-called, we should say, study group by the merchant Semyon Remezov, and who wrote the first drawings of the Siberia, Book of Siberia, in which we may find the information about the Kazakhstan and archaeological remnants of that period. So there were several first and second academic expeditions which explored history, geography, ethnography of the people throughout the Russia, because these new territories became part of the empire, and the state agency wanted to know who are these people with whom we deal to work. This very much resembles the way how the British Empire stepped their footprint on the Indian subcontinent, and it started with the exploration in academic field, in geography and in topography, to make cartography or mapping of the region, of the people who live there. So in 1733, throughout the actually most part of the 18th century, this expedition took place, and by the 19th century, particularly by the middle of 19th century, we may claim that there is also local grown-up scholars, particularly Chokan Valekhanov, who was very crucial in defining, depicting, studying, and academically analyzing, as well as from the intelligence perspective as well, analyzing the area of Kazakhstan and what we call now Xinjiang. Xinjiang, this is an area in western, sometimes it's called western Pakistan, Xinjiang autonomous region of modern China, inhabited by Turkic nations, particularly by many people who live in Central Asia, plus Uyghurs as well. So Chokan Valekhanov was very instrumental in bringing the knowledge and making the knowledge production on the people of those areas and bringing it back to the Russian Empire, because he graduated himself from the Omsk Cadet military corpus. He was a captain, and he was trained as a military, he was trained as a historian, geographer, and he was, by the way, the person who belonged to the one of the highest elite families of the middle port of Kazakhstan. He was Chingizid, so in his blood there was the blood of Chingiz Khan, so we call these people elite, who traced the descendancy down to Chingiz Khan. So he himself, and then the Russian scholars such as Vasily Radlov, and then Vasily Bartlett at the turn of the 19th, 20th century. So all these activities created also institutional setup, because there have been set up the Archaeological Commission, Historical Museum, as well as you see, Moscow Archaeological Society in St. Petersburg and Moscow, and Turkestan Circle of the Archaeology lovers, amateurs, which have been set up in Turkestan, in Tashkent in 1895. And Bartlett himself was the founding member of this. He was a very big scholar who also contributed towards understanding the historical plot based on Arabic and Persian language. knowledge. So this Russian Empire's exploration in Central Asia has been made within the much broader frame of the same activity that took place in the western or some greater Asian part of the Central Asia. So the expeditions of Oriol's time, Alexander in Xinjiang, in found Buddha's caves in Dunhuang, in Tibet, as well as northern Pakistan and Kashmir. Alexander Marshall, who you know perhaps was a scholar, archaeologist who, with the help of Indian scholars, found the Mohenjo-Daro and Harappa civilizations in the early 20th century. The huge legacy imprint could be given to the French archaeological expeditions in Afghanistan, so-called DAFA, which is starting since 1923 throughout almost the whole 20th century with some disturbances during the Second World War, contributed a lot towards exploring Afghanistan, Pakistan, and yes, this area and southern Central Asia. And of course, there is a German group on expeditions in early also 19th century, 20th centuries by Gulev and von Lecoq, who found contributed to the Buddhist studies and Central Asian studies of the in academic field. So, and you may also see the institutional setups happening also there since 18th century, like the British Museum, Musée de Beaux-Arts de Lyon, Musée Louvre, Musée Guimet of Asian art, and so on and so forth. So when we come now to the particular 20th century, the archaeology became a part of so-called ideological paradigm shift, which happened because of this revolution of 1970, when the Russian Empire had been collapsed, and instead the Soviet Union had been set up. So here I will mention two paradigms. First of all, so-called Marxist paradigm, on the ideological paradigm, on the basis of which the whole premise of the Soviet Union has been made. Though it is ideological paradigm, but it was influenced to such extent that it became a major ideological current that organized around itself different aspects of life under the Soviets. And Orientalistic discourse. So Marxist and Orientalist discourses became instrumental in highlighting the following issues that have been done during the Soviet period, particularly as far as Central Asian and Kazakhstan cultures are concerned. So this is a so-called modernized vision, mission of socialism vis-a-vis underdevelopment of feudalism in Central Asia. So this paradigm was absolutely masked because the ideology of Leninism and Marxism postulated the importance of modernization in all fields of society, and within this framework there were no space of previous so-called feudal remnants of ways of life of people who were stuck in these ways of life before 20th century. So there is another dimension as a dichotomy between the nomadic, that is less developed as understood, and sedentary or more developed population. So this paradigm clearly drew a line between the city dwellers and former nomadic dwellers, and also the true line between Kazakhstan and other parts, and other nations of Central Asia, like Uzbeks or Tajiks or sedentarized people, settled people, and also the leading role of urban working class vis-a-vis rural dwellers. So this is another ideological imprint that had very huge significance for the way how the archaeology, how the identity of particularly the Kazakhs had been shaped. And the last one is the nature of Asian power as an Eastern despotism, which is a phrase that had been taken by Marx, and his authority became a basis for all ideological works that should follow this or that aspects of history and archaeology and culture studies during the Soviet Union. However, on the other side, you may find a very same Soviet romantic ideology and knowledge construction that contributed towards knowledge construction, that is internationalism, social equality or equity, education for all, and secularism. So this is so-called contradictions between the modernity and tradition. There is no contradiction for ideological strength per se. However, that has an impact on the way how the knowledge construction has been applied towards the Kazakhs' history. This paradigm influenced the way how the space was constructed. Even in mapping, cartography, and geographic terminology, you may find the shift because this ideology implied that the huge region of Central Asia, though it was a sort of monolith, if you look at from the view from the central from Moscow, Pittsburgh during the Soviet time, though it was of course it was not a monolith, it was embracement of different various ways of cultural ways of life, including religion as well. And for the purpose of the sample how the ideology shifted the cartography, it was even changing of the name of the region. It was called Central Middle Asia, and Kazakhstan. So in all books during the Soviet period, you may find these definitions. There were no definitions of Central Asia because of that ideological paradigm that defined the normals of the particular space, less developed, and because of this nomadic and rural dwellers differences, and because of the urban class, because of the class perspective was very important, and because of this urban class, the nomadic space was given special treatment. I will tell you a little bit later, because that was easier for the central state agency to distinguish the former sedentary and nomadic population on the one side, and at the same time, the nomadic population, due to its more flexibility, mobility, have been more adaptive towards a new modern paradigm. And it has been much easier way to shape a new ideological and knowledge construction among the former nomadic population rather than the former sedentary people. And for this reason particularly, there were more inclinations of the Kazakhs towards the Russian culture, and because also of the long border, there were no border, let's say, regional frontier, let's say like this, within. And this was the same way how when Islam came to the Central Asia, it came from different ways, but when it came through the Arabs, then it came through the Tatars, and it was the Tatars from the Russian Empire who contributed towards Islamization of the Kazakh people more than it could be done by other ways. So it's, you know how this geography defines the way of living, how the way of living, and also again geography defines your ways of communication with the neighbors, and how these are shaped throughout in some periods by the ideology and state agency. So when the country became independent in 1991, immediately, just 2 years after it had been proposed, and the leaders of the country, of Central Asian countries, agreed to name and rebrand the label as a Central Asia, because they didn't want to be middle. Middle is in between. This is in between stages of Bhavka, when he told that we're stuck in between and we're not free from this. And at the same time, central it means centrality. For this reason, it became Central Asia since 1993, and it also resonated with experience values and emotions of people of the day. So the Soviet ideological paradigm has been reflected also in the history of art as a discipline, because the history of art, as we may say that history of art and archaeology is most neutral, depoliticized, de-ideologized fields. However, the Soviet experience showed that it was very much mostly ideologized fields of knowledge production, which had to serve the purpose of building some new ideological Soviet person, Soviet man, which was called. So architecture has been, actually that was not only the Soviet historian of arts, like Galina Pugachenkova, famous archaeologist and historian of art from Tashkent. It was just general, perhaps it was more about Orientalistic paradigm, when in other parts of the world the culture of the other Asian countries had been viewed from the perspective of the up and down, and as architecture was within this paradigm had been viewed as a high art. So if you have architecture, your culture is more developed, you have to say something to the world, for that you need to be treated accordingly. And as for nomadic space, there was not so much defined architecture in the traditional sense, so-called normative, in the brackets, of course, the normative sense. But there was another type of architecture. Today, we didn't, by the way, spoke about the sacred places, or mazare. Mazare, this is a places when the people come to the, some place, natural place, or place associated with some healer, or some leader, or some scholar, or religious person, who is perceived to have some huge energy and power, and by washing their face, or drinking the water from the well, or just sleeping overnight, or making the circumvention. So, because in Hindi it's parikrama, you only go with around the temple, or around the church, or around the mosque. So all traditions specify this. So it means even if you sleep at this place, and these places are usually made of some, just not big architecture, some small, like a form of mosque, or some other architectural premises, let's say. So this part of architecture is not very exclusive in terms of defined every element, but it conveys the same meaning. And in the nomadic space, it was very much popular. And also depending on which part of Kazakhstan. In southern Kazakhstan, you may find a huge monuments of architectural places related to Islam. Like in Turkestan, we have Hoja Ahmed Yasavi, this special place, and also. So, from Soviet ideological paradigm and history of art perspective, architecture was a high art, and for this reason, Kazakhstan was excluded from all books, even the textbooks on the monuments and architecture. The monuments of the Soviet Union, there is one book, and in 70s, in 80s, they just pop up. Because topographically, it was not part of Srednyi Asia, Middle Asia. It was just Kazakhstan. And from an ideological perspective, it was a part of nomadic, and it was not high, so it didn't deserve. So these are all elements which just like precursors, which contributed to what we somehow experience nowadays in. So the Soviet knowledge production was very important for understanding, and institutions and actors contributed a lot. They started archaeological explorations since 1940s. Though some archaeological excavations took place also in 1920s, just after the revolution, but they were not consistent. Consistency became since 1940s, when you see here, the archaeological expeditions took place in different parts of Kazakhstan, because Kazakhstan is a very big country, and we divide it like geographically north, east, south, and west. For this reason, expeditions also there is this specific Central Kazakhstan Archaeological Expedition, which is from the Paleolithic, is very important place of meteorology. Many thousands years ago. I don't particularly have now the particular data. For South Kazakhstan, it was academic Berishtan, who also explored Kyrgyzstan. Almaty is on the southeastern part of Kazakhstan, on the border with Kyrgyzstan, and we have, you go to Bishkek and we have a lot of, commonality with the Issyk-Kul culture and Bishkek cultural zone from archaeological perspective. East Kazakhstan, it Altai Mountains, which we have Altai Mountains divided between Kazakhstan, Mongolia and Russia. So sometimes we call it Kazakhstan Altai, Mongolian Altai or Russian Altai. But geography is the same and the cultural zone became also almost the same. And the Western Kazakhstan expedition, which is bordering Caspian Sea and the steppes, this is a very harsh zone and with Turkmenistan and again with Russia. And with nowadays Azerbaijan by the Caspian Sea. So we have these different types of climate and different types of archaeological expedition. And I would like to point your attention to the 1954 expedition by Kamil Akishev, elite expedition for southeastern Kazakhstan, which I will go a little bit. On the right, they see also institutional setup. This is the Academy of Science of Kazakhstan. Perhaps it is actually not far from the Hotel of Kazakhstan. It's a big, huge yellow buildings. It was established in 1946, and by the way, it was built by the Japanese war prisoners. Some part of it, because of this, during Second World War, some prisoners were there, and they could be used as a working force, including this Academy of Science. And we have, before Academy of we have Institute of History, Archaeology and Ethnography, major institution which is dealing with our history since 1945. But before that, there is an institution called Kazakh Scientific Research Institute of National Culture in 1933. This is the first time when the word national has been used, because ideologically the nationalism has been banned in the Soviet Union. So after 1933, throughout the 40s, it has rechanged its name. When this archaeologist Kamil Akishev since '54 started exploring the southeastern parts of Kazakhstan, where Almaty is now here, he found a very huge discovery of the so-called golden warrior of the Saka Kurgans. Saka Kurgans, this is the burial mounds where the Saka tribes has been buried with all the equipment, horses, with the jewelry and whatever, accompanying artifacts, and that is relates to the Sithen, as they know in Greek sources, or Saka, as they know in Eastern sources, particularly in Chinese, and they came down to South Asia. How they have been known. So the significance of these findings was that it showed that quite rich, not quite, it's very rich, like Oxus treasure found by Dalton in 1904 by British archaeologists and art historians, and became. So the area of between Amudarya and Sirdarya, or Oxus River, how it had been known by Greek, it had been given by Alexander the Great, the area of the southern Central Asia, northern Afghanistan, had been very rich in discoveries. So the Saka burial tribal showed that the richness could be gone even northern to the Bactria, so-called Margiana and Bactria places, cultural zones, northern toward the what we have now Tianshan area, and then even northern toward the steppe zone. For this, these findings show developed culture with like a tribe that could also contribute to not only to the region, perhaps to the global history, and also because the Sakas had their own scripture, and which had been deciphered to a certain extent, and that there were even equally powerful, like the sea fence that has been, spread all over the Eurasia, and confederation of different tribes organized under the same cults, religions, and the same equipment and the ways of life. They were nomads who came up to Central Europe. They came to the Black Sea. That's why Greeks started new there, and they came also to Persia, what is now Iran, and that's how the Darius the Great employed them as the warriors during the wars against Sparta. So this is the southern eastern part, which of this Saka Kurgan mounds can be found in Russia, in eastern Russia, like in Tuva, northern Mongolia, in eastern Kazakhstan, and southeastern. So this is just to give you a glimpse of what the artifacts of the so-called Simulka, with these inscriptions, which have been translated by the scholars as you should put wine and oil in some. This is like a recipe preparation for some rituals, because those sakas have been known as sakas halmavarga, that is those who prepare haloma or soma, the ancient drink of perhaps hallucinic origin, which the sakas used as drinking during their rituals, and not only sakas and Indo-Iranian, because the sakas were Indo-Iranian speaking tribes. So we may find, so that is the details. This is also how the golden bottles have been found in Sikh mounds. So all these elements made of pure gold with different clothing, with different elements. Oops. Yeah, like these incense burners. This is where sacrificial rituals took place. They put fire. So there is a soul cult. They were worshippers of the forces of the nature, most of whom the sun. So they are worshippers. This is also the artifacts of Nazerke Zharbossynova in eastern Kazakhstan. Just to make it. So I'm coming now to the idea of the knowledge construction and identity in contemporary Kazakhstan. So you got an impression of who the Saka was and how the archaeological excavations took place and found these elements of the treasure. So throughout since 1991, but mostly in 21st century, the state agency started implementing different programs, like you see here, cultural heritage, people in the stream of history, Mangalikye, that is meant eternal nation, Urbanizm Guru, that it means spiritual modernization, sacred Kazakhstan, which have been culminated in the creation of special institutions, such institutions for the study of Ulus of Zhushi. Ulus Zhushi, this is the institution that studied the legacy of the Genghis Khan, because in 13th century they buy wars, and his first son, eldest son, has been given the land, or we call it Ulus, the land in the area which is constitutes now the Kazakhstan and Central Asia. So that was typically nomadic part. The other Ulus have been given to other sons, who was in Khan, in Khanid in Persia, the son who later became part of the Yuan dynasty in China. So they became more acculturated towards existing cultural zones, whether Iranian, or Persian, or Russian, like Vatican, or Chinese. However, as for Central Asia was concerned, this Ulus Zhushi was basically, he didn't experience any changes. Because the Mongols were nomads, the existing tribes were nomads, they just acculturated and became even restored and reinforced their nomadic presence. That's therefore in what we now have as a part of territory of Kazakhstan, we have so-called descendants of those, as in a certain way, descendants of those understand that this part of the history that had been neglected during Soviet time, the state initiated this institution, set out the programs, and it became possible actually recently, since 2021. And one of the elements of the Saka burials was this golden man. Today there is photo of the person, but people, scholars debate whether there was a girl or a boy. However, because in Saka tribes, those equally was fighters and equally wearing the same teenagers, but it has given the sculpture the golden warrior, and it became part of the monument of independence in Almaty in 1995. And I guess tomorrow you will go to the square and you will see this element of its this cultural element that became part of this public landscape, and mostly became part of the ideological certain of the same golden warrior with these bars, flying bars, have been printed out as a jubilee medal of 10 years of independence. This is silver. So it became printed as the banknote series, most recent of which in 2023. We have also 2025 last year, 5 from 10,000. So where you may find different elements of those zoomorphic, so-called zoomorphic animal art, by which Scythians and Sakas have been famous. So the idea was that the state planned to incorporate those elements of the far distant history and past towards the current narrative, towards the public spaces, towards the knowledge production, towards the ideological construction. And also we have ideas, because particularly throughout Almaty, that was the zone which had been considered as a sacred zone by the Sakas, because the archaeologists found more than 40 Saka burial mounds, kurgans. Some of them are could be visible, most of them ruined, some of them had been how to say, deleted, let's say so, by this new building construction. But in the Boraldai area, in the northern part of Almaty, there is some zone where these Saka kurgans have been still there. So the local mayor decided to prepare a sort of cultural zone there, Saka culture zone, to mingle the natural and the cultural landscape into one, so to make it more attractive for tourism. However, 50 kilometers from Almaty, you may not go this time, but if somebody would like to come here in future, there is a city called Issyk. And it is in that Issyk city we have a museum of where this golden man has been found, and all this. The artifacts now in the National Museum in Astana. However, there are some artifacts left there, and there are some excavations. 2 years ago, Secretary went there to see we had some seminar, and we saw the Chinese archaeological expeditions are very active there, and they now working on the same area, like because there are different kurgans, like 150. So all of them are dotted over the space, and because it needs investments, and it needs also some time, and perhaps it requires some external investments. So this area is now developed by the Chinese archaeological expeditions. We spoke with the leader of the expeditions, and they're very fun, very interested towards not finding another golden man, but perhaps to try to reveal what, because they have these possibilities. So what are the main conclusions and takeaways from this? I just briefly wrote. So after this, post-1991, the policy of the state towards heritage changed, of course. It was the refuge from the old paradigm pattern of this nomadic sedentary division, and towards more considering of the input of the steppe people and the culture to the World Heritage. The state agency has used, of course, the shift to harness this process of knowledge production as a way for reconstructing new identity, statehood, nationhood, but on its own terms. So it became a sort of politicized. This is how the ecology became part of politics, part of ideology, but on the terms which, contrary to the Soviet period, started defining highlighting the input of nomadic peoples. So this so-called appropriation of culture by the state agency was manifested very broadly, and it was profoundly spread through all walks of deep symbolic penetration in the fabric of the statehood, because it became part of the elements and symbols of sacred culture became part of the state symbols of the republic, and also particular of its coat of arms. Here you may see this coat of arms, the state emblem of Kazakhstan. Here this is the second version, because the first version was in 1992 in Cyrillic scripture, which is called Kazakhstan. Then in 2018 it became changed to Latin scripture, because throughout the second decade, there was throughout 20 years, there were debates whether the Kazakh language should be used Latin script, and going away from Cyrillic scripture or not. However, as far as of now, the decision has not been taken, but unlike in Uzbekistan or in Azerbaijan. However, in this emblem of courts, the new Latin scripture has been introduced, as we say, 2018 in Latin language. So the basic major conclusion is that archaeological discoveries is not only about history and knowledge production, but this is also about the identity of people who live now, so many thousands years away from their ancestors, and who live now, and it became a part of the political symbols of independence. It became part of financial instruments of independence development, because we saw these banknotes of National Bank, which was widely used, a new one. And also it became part of the construction of new cultural institutions of museums and shared public spaces. So for this reason we may frame that, we may call that archaeological field became a specific reference point, which is framed in this dual process of interplay between nation building and knowledge construction. And for that, it is very important, at least it is ideologized, and as I think presumed, not only in Kazakhstan, as also in other countries, who are going through this process of nation building. With this, I would like to thank the big Ahmed. Oh, thank you very much.
That was fascinating, Laura. And even, for me, so many years of visiting Kazakhstan with so much new stuff, and all the ideas which were put together is very, very interesting. And I think now in the next few days here, even when you look at the architecture around the city and the symbols, and you will look at it with maybe some more this perspective of art history and archaeology. So yeah, I'm sure there are going to be lots of questions.